Colonel Jessica Cowden is currently wearing multiple hats as the Acting Chief Medical Officer for Enabling Biotechnologies at the Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Defense, and the Chief of Infectious Disease Programs at the Defense Institute of Medical Operations. She is trained in both pediatric infectious diseases and public health, and we are thrilled to have her with us today to talk about Operations Warp Speed vaccine acceleration projects. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Jessica Cowden.
Right, great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to be talking to you about the DoD involvement in and support to what was previously named Operation Warp Speed, the interagency U.S. government operation for COVID vaccine development. My name is Colonel Jessica Cowden. I'm a pediatrician and an infectious diseases specialist who is currently stationed at Defense Institute for Medical Operations down at Lackland. But since June of last year, I've been serving as the Acting Chief Medical Officer at Enabling Biotechnologies in the Vaccine Acceleration Project at the Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Defense, or JPEO-CBRND, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. I had actually never heard of JPEO prior to last spring, so we'll provide a little bit of information about that. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the work that we've been doing over the past year in support of the U.S. government interagency response. And I'd like to start by saying I have nothing to disclose, and also being quite clear that the content of this presentation is the sole responsibility of myself. I'm not presenting on behalf of JPEO, on behalf of DoD, or any of the services. So over the next 25 minutes or so, we'll talk a bit about JPEO, just briefly to introduce what JPEO is and does. Excuse me, and then talk a bit about Operation Warp Speed, again, as it was formerly named, and walk through the history of how DoD came to be involved to support and what we did to support, specifically at the military treatment facilities involved in the phase 3 vaccine trials. We don't have a lot of time, so I won't go through specifics of the readouts and results and a lot of detail about each of the trials themselves, but happy to answer questions on those as I'm able. And then at the end, we'll just talk briefly about the current focus and the near future focus of the interagency response in the vaccine space. So first, again, let's start with just a couple of slides introducing JPEO. Again, I'm an Air Force pediatric infectious diseases doc who's been involved in research for a number of years and was not familiar with JPEO. So there may be others who also are not familiar. So JPEO is dedicated to obviously chem bio defense, and is really focused on advanced development. So this slide highlights the mission and vision of JPEO. These were provided by PAO at JPEO in advance of this brief. And then just a little bit of the backstory. JPEO was established in 1994 by Public Law 103160 to consolidate chem bio warfare defense programs and to designate the Army as the executive agent for DoD. So, under DoD at the Secretary of Defense level, the Army again is the executive agent for chem bio defense, and JPEO was established as the joint agency with the lead for that, again focused on advanced development. In this panel on the left, you'll see the national policies and guidance that guide and provide oversight and direction for the work at JPEO and for chem bio defense research and development in DoD. Not to dive into the weeds of JPEO and the org chart, but just again for folks' awareness, there are 3 programs with joint program leads under JPEO. One is entitled Protection, which is focused on individual protection, collective protection, and decontamination. CBRN Medical is focused on vaccines, treatments, and diagnostics for chem biodefense. And then sensors is, as you might expect, focused on sensors, both sensors that are not connected to individuals and sensors that are that people might wear. And then over on the right side of the slide, you'll see other capabilities. So there's CBRN Special Operations Forces, IMIT, and lastly, Enabling Biotechnologies. So I was asked to come in and support, again, under Enabling Biotechnologies in a new activity they had during COVID called the Vaccine Acceleration Program. But Enabling Biotechnologies is really focused on advanced development and manufacturing, and on assays and reagent development. And under there as well, you'll see emerging infectious disease clinical capability. So DoD was supporting under that Enabling Biotechnology arm. This slide is current as of the 5th of March and just outlines some of the activities of JPEO in support of the national COVID-19 response. So you'll see at the top, the partners, really mostly USG agencies, but also academia is listed there. The people, there are subject matter experts who we'll talk about a little bit embedded within the federal response operation, as well as a lot of people who supported but are not assigned to Operation Warp Speed or now the federal response operation. So under processes, you'll see a number of companies listed as well as funding and doses. And so I just want to highlight here, again, a number of products. JPEO was engaged in manufacturing, development, and scale up, as well as fill finish of products and procuring doses for DoD for multiple products. And of course, this was largely at risk as products were all in early development at the beginning of the pandemic. And then down at the bottom, you'll see products, and a whole bunch of products, of course, are listed, including vaccines, but where we fall in and what we're going to talk about during this period is the phase 3 trials, which you'll see listed under enablers. So that's really the foundation that I wanted to lay about JPEO. And now we can transition a bit to go back again to the May-June timeframe and talk about the stand up of the interagency response that at that time was termed Operation Warp Speed. So again, we've gone through JPEO a bit, and we talked about the fact that emerging infectious diseases and enablers fell under JPEO and the efforts that were receiving funding from DoD through DHA for the COVID response. Included here are, in the middle here, a press release from HHS dated May 15th, announcing the framework and leadership for Operation Warp Speed. And then in the bottom right, a science publication by Larry Corey, John Mascola, Anthony Fauci, and Francis Collins at NIAID, outlining the strategic approach to vaccine R&D. Again, these came out in May, so it feels like forever ago now. Immediately following, really on the same day as that HHS announcement announcing Operation Warp Speed, DoD came out with statements of support to the operation as well. And here is a statement from Defense Secretary Mark Esper, dated 15 May, highlighting the support, the direct support and military service member support in the fight against COVID on the front lines across the globe, but also highlighting that through our research and development labs at DARPA and Defense Health Agency and our massive logistical knowledge and capacity, DoD would be supporting Operation Warp Speed. And it was difficult to understand really early on what that level of support would really look like, but moving forward, it became more clear. So this slide begins to outline the approach to the vaccine development under Operation Warp Speed. And really this again, was pretty unclear early on in the response. So in the mid-May, everything was stood up, and then things were evolving over the weeks that followed that as it became clear the approach that the government would take and the interagency operation would take to the vaccine clinical development. The stated goal of Operation Warp Speed at its stand-up was to develop safe and effective vaccine in sufficient quantities to protect the US population by January of 2021. So the Operation Warp Speed vaccine team was initially headed by Peter Marks from CBER at the FDA. This rapidly transitioned, and Matt Hepburn, who had previously been at JPEO, was asked and tasked to lead the vaccine clinical development, the vaccine development overall at Operation Warp Speed, and he was then assigned temporarily to HHS. Under the overall vaccine effort, again led by Matt Hepburn, vaccine development was led by John Mascola at NIH, and it continues to be led by John Mascola. Under vaccine development, there are three buckets: preclinical assays, and then the phase 3 clinical trials. And the phase 3 clinical trial team is co-led by Merlin Robb and Mary Maravich. And many of you may know Merlin Robb. He's a retired Army colonel, a pediatric infectious disease physician who works at the military HIV research program and is currently working at RARE. Also under the overall vaccine effort, there's a supply and manufacturing team and delivery and administration teams. All right, so the Operation Warp Speed vision for the vaccine trials was, again, evolved over the first few weeks or even month of discussions. But the goal overall was to conduct comparable safety and efficacy trials of vaccine candidates that would be studied under different protocols. So the determination was made that multiple vaccines wouldn't be evaluated under a single protocol. Each vaccine would be evaluated under an independent protocol, but that the protocol should be harmonized to allow comparability of the products as much as possible, and that the sites that would be enrolling for particular protocols would only enroll for one protocol and one product at a time. There was an overarching trial design that was established and really provided as guidance under Operation Warp Speed to the different companies. And each product had its own and continues to have its own product clinical team with leads from BARDA and HHS and DOD as well, and NIAID. And these teams manage in collaboration with the companies, the contracts and the trial design and oversight for the products themselves. So OWS defined the core protocol elements, including the endpoints and the target population. These core protocol elements included safety monitoring and readouts, safety endpoints, including medically attended adverse events and severe adverse events. They outlined the immune assays that would be done for each trial and for each product. And these assays are standardized under Operation Warp Speed. And the intent was that validated assays would be performed at qualified central labs, so that, again, the products were being evaluated in a standard way that was harmonized across the trials. The primary efficacy endpoint for each of the trials was to be a clinical endpoint, so measuring vaccine efficacy against symptomatic infection. And then seroconversion was to be included as a secondary or co-primary endpoint, and that was to be determined for each trial. The definitions of symptomatic infection were not predetermined or dictated by Operation Warp Speed, so the definitions of symptomatic infection in each trial do differ slightly, but the primary efficacy endpoints for each were clinical infection. And then the population to be enrolled was approximately 30,000 adults, age stratified 18 to 65-year-olds and over the age of 65 or 65 and over. And the trials were supposed to enroll within a 45-day period, and the demographic distribution was supposed to be representative of the US population. Operation Warp Speed also established a framework for governance. So there's a single central IRB that's a commercial IRB for all of the trials. NIAID established a data safety monitoring board and a patient safety review team as well. So those were standardized and harmonized across the trials and products. So the next piece then, of course, was for Operation Warp Speed to determine which vaccines would be included and funded by the US government for development under this effort. And there were 6 products funded under Operation Warp Speed. And really the funding mechanisms were under HHS BARDA. There were 2 nucleic acid products, which are both mRNA products that people are all familiar with, Moderna and Pfizer. And I just want to note here for Pfizer, I've got it starred in italics. The US government did not fund the phase 3 trial for Pfizer. That was entirely funded by Pfizer. The US government supported procurement of doses for the Pfizer product. Then there were 2 viral vectored products, both adenovirus vectored. One's the Janssen product, which is an adenovirus 26 vector, and then the AstraZeneca Oxford product, which is a chimp-ad vectored product. And then 2 protein subunits, which both include an adjuvant, Novavax and Sanofi. Again, we're not really going to spend a lot of time on particular updates and readouts for the trials, but I think people are tracking that now we have EUAs for the 2 nucleic acid products. The Janssen product already has an EUA. AstraZeneca released their primary analysis data on the 25th of March and are preparing their packet for EUA submission to the FDA. The 2 protein subunits were a bit behind the others, really due to the challenges of scale up of manufacturing for recombinant proteins. But Novavax also is far along in its phase 3 trial, collecting endpoints and collecting safety and efficacy data. And the Sanofi product is a little bit behind. It's currently in a phase 2 trial. Okay, so that's sort of the foundation and the landscape of Operation Warp Speed. And now I want to move a bit to dial back again in the calendar to the May-June timeframe and describe a bit the efforts and the program management within DoD that led to our site preparation and involvement at the DoD military treatment facility sites, including at BAMC and Wilford Hall. So early on, really in late May, DoD was asked to potentially support Operation Warp Speed vaccine efficacy trials by contributing sites. So as the weeks went on and the structure that I described was evolving, the structure of the sites and site selection was also evolving. But it became clear that the NIAID Research Network, which they sort of coalesced a number of different research networks into the Coronavirus Prevention Network. So the NIAID Research Network academic sites would be sites under the trials. The clinical research organizations who the companies had contracted to run their trials would also provide private sites and private research sites, CRO sites for the conduct of the trial as well. And then the VA, Indian Health Service, and DoD were all asked to also prepare and contribute sites. So under DoD, the approach that we took early on was that we should evaluate and prepare multiple sites to set the conditions so that DoD could support trials starting at different times and could potentially pivot if we needed in response to changing epidemiology in the US. Early on, again, as we started this process and tried to think through what sites might make sense within DoD and where we could potentially support, we really were taking a very broad look at the potential DoD research sites. So of course we have clinical trial centers in the United States, which are dedicated to the conduct of regulated clinical trials. So we have RARE and NMRC. USU has a small CTC, and then USAMRIID has a CTC. So we have, 4, if I can do math, sites within the US, which are dedicated, DoD sites that are dedicated to this type of work. Although they haven't done large phase 3 trials, so it's not completely plug and play, but they're dedicated to clinical trials and regulated clinical trials. Then we have, of course, our CONUS military treatment facility sites, which have ongoing research and ongoing ID and immunizations research as well, but not phase 1, 2, or 3 regulated clinical trial experience for infectious diseases and immunization specifically. And then, of course, we have our OCONUS clinical trial centers as well, which are really the most well-placed and the most experienced for this type of work, but our OCONUS, of course. And then there was a discussion, and so I left this on just to mention, there was also discussion that DoD might be asked to support a mobile capability or a temporary surge capability, either independently or in support of CRO or academic sites, if there was a need to respond to an outbreak at a meat packing plant or at a specific nursing home. So there was a lot of discussion actually about how DoD might be able to support a mobile capability for research as well. So with all of this on the table and a lot of uncertainty, we established a number of working groups to really try to think this through in a logical and strategic way, and pull together a number of different stakeholders with decision-making ability, really, to be able to move this discussion forward as we planned. So first, we established a small group of subject matter experts and key stakeholders, and this was really quite small, but it involved leads from Immunizations Health and leads from IDCRP, as well as a few key individuals who've done quite a lot of phase 3 trials and multi-center trials within DoD. Then we had a larger group, which involved broad stakeholders from the services, research entities, DHA, funding, regulatory. So we had that larger group to help think things through. And then ultimately a senior advisory committee that was chaired by Dr. Line at DHA, and that came a little bit later. But I wanted to talk through, again, because it's really program management rather than the direct research, that's the focus of this effort and this presentation. So wanted to talk through a little bit our approach to site prioritization and how we tried to think things through and to present this to leadership and to the companies themselves as well when they were ready to do site evaluations and site selection. So as we approached it, we thought, well, the minimum site requirements for execution of a study would be that, of course, you have the target population from which to recruit, that the sites would be able to execute a quality regulated clinical trial, an FDA regulated clinical trial to evaluate endpoints, that there's facility structure in place and staffing to facilitate high throughput enrollment and follow-up of study subjects. And that there were some appropriate research staff on the ground that we could potentially augment through a contract with a CRO, but we had to have a core to be able to bridge and get things started, and also to really be the leads on the ground. And then from that, we took a tiered approach to our US DoD site prioritization. So we sort of subjectively, but we rated the capacity, capability, feasibility, and experience at different sites at CONUS. And then had modeling data to inform, and got information on the catchment population of each facility of older MHS beneficiaries as well. So this slide sort of states the same, but provides a little bit of additional background information leading into the modeling. And I thought I would just share this. We spent a lot of time talking about the modeling and the population of interest as we tried to make these decisions. And unfortunately, of course, for the country, in the end, really the pandemic was everywhere, was not really localized to a specific geographic location or a specific state or city. So in the end, the focus on modeling diminished quite a lot, really, as the pandemic unfolded in the US. But early on, we really spent a lot of time talking about modeling and the numbers 30 and 60 days out. So I just wanted to share this. You know, it's labeled that this is not current. Obviously, these numbers are from June, early June. And again, each week we would have updated numbers that and these came from Advana. And Advana was providing these numbers and projections to DoD leadership for many other reasons as well. But specifically for us, we were interested in what the projections on case counts were in the general areas and zip codes around our bases. So not specific to DoD populations or beneficiaries, but really just regionally in the communities where our bases are located, what were the projections of how the pandemic would be unfolding as far as case counts in the next 30 and 60 days. And these models took into account the state guidance, the non-pharmacologic interventions and that were put in place and then lifted and then put in place in different locations. And then of course the current case counts at the time that they ran the models each week. Okay, so I'm a bit circuitous and I apologize about that, but this slide compiles those different factors that we were trying to take into account as we made decisions and briefed leadership about the different sites that we could potentially provide. So if I could just highlight a couple of things on here, of course, you'll see the facilities, the county that they're located in. And then again, I mentioned from TRICARE, we were able to get the catchment population at each facility of retirees and dependents. And we asked for aged 56 and over for this breakdown. Then we have the case counts per day. And this you can see is from August, these case counts per day. And then we did a tiered evaluation. Again, I mentioned this previously, but it was a bit subjective, but to try to quantitate and lump together a bit our different MTFs and the research activities at each one. And the rare and USAMRIID CTCs are listed here as well. So putting together our different facilities and possible sites and giving them a tier based on their current research infrastructure and staffing, their experience with FDA regulated clinical trials, and our perception of their ability to enroll high capacity for enrollment in a short period of time. So you can see those definitions here at the bottom of the slide. We also try to take into account whether the sites had been sites in the PAVED study, which is a IDCRP IHD Immunizations Health Infectious Disease Clinical Research Program phase 4 influenza vaccine effectiveness study. So I know that that is a study here in San Antonio. So I think individuals attending this are probably familiar with it. And based on that, we compiled all those different data points to come up with a proposed priority ranking. And that is what we moved forward with. So these Priority 1 sites that are highlighted in red were the sites that we moved forward with for the phase 3 vaccine trials. I included here, just for interest, if you are interested, the OCONUS sites as well. These are rare network sites internationally, and we were really looking at their experience with large vaccine trials that could inform their capability to enroll in these trials as well. So taking all of that, we tried to evaluate what we thought would be required and what we thought would be included in the clinical trials without yet having a protocol, to then go to site teams and points of contact at the sites to try to do an assessment of what the commanders and the site research teams thought they would be able to provide and what external support they would need, excuse me, and to make determinations on how feasible this would be for us at our DoD MTF sites. This highlights the strengths and opportunities of DoD sites, and I won't read through these, but they're here for you to review if you're interested. And I think we're all sort of aware of this, but these are the qualities that our sites really brought that were of interest to the companies and to the interagency response as well. All right, so as I mentioned earlier on, each vaccine candidate was to be evaluated in an independent phase 3 trial, and the sponsor for each of those trials was the company sponsor developing that product. And so after we had sort of prioritized sites, done site assessments, and begun working with DHA leadership and with research leads within the services, and we got to engage with the research leads at the command level, and with the identified research team leads as well, and moved the effort forward. Ultimately, AstraZeneca selected 3 DoD sites, which included 5 facilities for the AstraZeneca phase 3 trial, and Novavax selected Fort Bragg, and then Sanofi selected 2 OCONUS sites in Kenya, the Kisumu and Kericho clinical trial centers. This slide highlights that the governance structure that I alluded to earlier, but as time went on, this became a bit more formalized. And we did have, as I mentioned, the Senior Advisory Committee, which Dr. Line chaired from DHA, and the representatives from the key stakeholder organizations are listed here as well. And then we also were able to establish and were really given appointed names of the site leadership teams that would move the effort forward at each of the MTF sites. So after we did the assessment of what each site would need for support, we moved forward with the CRO contract to be able to have a clinical research organization really support the command and the PI at each site, and ensure there was adequate oversight of the conduct of the trial, provide additional staffing, and really just support the conduct of the trial to ensure that it was conducted in the manner it needed to be. And so this slide sort of outlines, it's a very complicated slide, but I wanted to include it here, outlines how the responsibilities and communication were really broken up between the sponsor hired clinical research organization who was responsible for the oversight of the trial in general overall, then the clinical trial teams at each of the MTF sites, and then the DoD hired clinical research organization, which was supporting the sites at each site level. I wanted to include this slide to really highlight, I can't even really articulate the amount of work from all of the individuals involved who touched this across different leadership levels, at the MTF level, up to really the DoD level. But I really want to highlight, I think, what the team was able to accomplish, again, at the higher program management level. What the teams were able to accomplish at the site levels is a whole nother conversation, which is incredibly important. But this one's a bit more removed from that. But in the trial preparation and in getting all of the everything needed in place to be able to start and to conduct these trials, there were many, many people involved. And through that, and I think really through the involvement across really from the tactical level of the research team at each MTF up to the very strategic level and senior DoD leadership, we were able to really achieve some efficiencies and accomplish things in a much shorter time frame than typically we would expect to have happen for standing up a new capability really at the MTFs and getting everything in place to be able to start. So on the right, on this slide, I've included the different key steps in planning and preparation that really went into getting everything ready. And then, of course, after the trials initiated at each of the sites, recruitment, study procedures, and quality data entry were the key activities. But really, if we focus on this planning and preparation before the trial started, we can see on this graphic the different key points and when those timelines of when those different milestones were achieved. So again, I'm not going to walk through data, but I just wanted to highlight what we did accomplish within DoD and what we did contribute to this overall effort. So for the AstraZeneca trial, I mentioned we had 5 sites. The site PIs are listed here. So Walter Reed and Fort Belvoir were combined into a single site for the purposes of the study, with Fort Belvoir being a satellite to Walter Reed. Commander Wes Campbell is the PI for that study, or for that site, excuse me. At JBSA, Colonel Coolidge is the site PI for the JBSA site, and BAMC was the site lead, and Wilford Hall was the satellite site under BAMC, is the way the site or the study was structured, excuse me. And then in San Diego at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, Captain Ryan Mabes is the site PI there. So you can see in this highlighted or bold line here, across our 5 MTFs, we enrolled 1,447 study participants, and a number of those, of course, signed consent, but then failed screening, so did not progress and remain in the study. But we did randomize and dose 1,309 study participants. And that's so we enrolled 1,447 out of the entire study, which was 32,000 approximately. And then for Novavax, we just had the one site at Fort Bragg at Womack, and Dr. Bruce McLenithan is the site PI for that study, and we enrolled 262 individuals and randomized 245. And I think I really want to mention and send a tremendous thank you and just highlight the tremendous work of the site PIs and the site teams at each of these sites. I think people are aware that this has been an extremely challenging environment to conduct clinical trials in the midst of a pandemic, of course, with supply shortages, PPE shortages, difficulty enrolling people, crazy press releases and data publication by press release, and lots of concerns about state safety and vaccine hesitancy as well. And then more recently, or really since December, the rollout of the EUA vaccines. So it's been really challenging for these teams, and they've done an incredible job. So just wanted to highlight that. So currently, there's still quite a lot of work ongoing. Still much work to be done. So the phase 3 trials are still ongoing. They're 2-year studies, so they'll continue to follow people for safety and for efficacy. The correlates of protection analyses are ongoing for the platforms that have enough data so far and enough samples for that to happen. So specifically, Moderna is the most far along for that evaluation. We've seen a number of publications come out about real world effectiveness. So the interagency vaccine team is still, monitoring that as well as that comes out, including the MMWR that was just published about vaccine effectiveness in healthcare workers and frontline responders in the United States. And then, of course, the focus has really shifted in the past month to a discussion and evaluation of efficacy against an approach to variants of concern, really with a lot of focus on the B1351 variant, which originated in South Africa. And then, of course, more recently, specifically with AstraZeneca, but really across all the products, increased surveillance and safety analysis, specifically for thromboembolic events. And then studies are ongoing and many are initiating for evaluation of safety and efficacy in pregnant women and adolescents and in younger children as well. So there's still quite a lot of work to be done under Operation Warp Speed and beyond. So I just wanted to put that there and highlight that. So in summary, sorry for my rapid pace and for being all over the place a bit, but I really wanted to highlight this interagency operation, which was established to oversee and drive the vaccine development, evaluation, manufacture, and distribution. And really, again, at the Operation Warp Speed level, or now the Federal Response Operation level, it's really about program management. But it has been incredible to be a part of that. It's really an unprecedented interagency effort. And Operation Warp Speed was DoD, and it continues to be, DoD and HHS co-led. And it's really an unprecedented public-private academic collaboration. So the amount of coordination, communication, and just the acceleration of timelines has been unprecedented, and hopefully will carry forward to be applied to other pathogens or the next pandemic, should it arise or when it arises. The DoD support to this effort has really been enormous. So I really want to highlight that as well. DoD supported the effort for the MTF involvement and funded the clinical trials at the MTFs. And really, this has been an opportunity to support this US government priority and an opportunity to build capability and further evaluate future DoD specific research questions. It's been hard for our research teams and our site PIs and all of the AIs that have supported across the sites as well. But hopefully when things settle, hopefully they'll look back on it as a positive experience where they were a part of this response at the national level, and where they led phase 3 vaccine trials at a critical time. So hopefully, again, hopefully when the dust settles and they look back, it will be a positive retrospective look. And then I also just wanted to comment, initially Operation Warp Speed was very US centric in its focus, but really the emerging variants have driven home the importance of more of a population approach and a global approach, which really dovetails nicely into other DoD efforts as well, and more of a global health engagement and recognizing the importance to global security and national security of a global approach and population level approach. And as I mentioned, there's still so much work to do. So lastly, I'd like to bring up this acknowledgement slide. I'm sure I've missed people, but I really wanted to be sure to highlight the site PIs and study teams, the small working group that really worked to put things together, and then the larger working group and the stakeholders. And then here, I should have added a slide really that's specific to San Antonio, because the support and the work that went into the preparation and the conduct and the ongoing work that's gone into the conduct of these trials by many individuals is just really tremendous. So I think I will add a slide there if I can to highlight that. And with that, I am finished. Thank you.